Probably the most frequent question that I get about gear, even more common than, say, what camera would I recommend or what lenses would I recommend, are questions about filters. And I can see, because there's lots of different types of filters and different styles, and they all do something slightly different. And it could be a little bit overwhelming if you're just entering the world of filters. So in this video, I'm going to go through all the filters that I use, what each of them do, and which ones I'd recommend for landscape photography. Before we start though, this video is sponsored by Squarespace. So if you need a website, a domain, or an online store, make your next move with Squarespace. First up, we have Polarisers. I'm starting with Polarisers because they're a pretty important filter. I probably use a polarizer on more than 95% of the images that I take. This one here is a screw-on polarizer. This one over here is a polarizer that mounts to my filter adapter. More about that later. They effectively work the same way. They're both circular polarizers, which means you've got two rings that slide against each other that allows you to dial in the amount of polarize effect you want on your image. When sun comes through the atmosphere, it bounces around the environment and effectively scatters. And so you've got light that's coming towards you of wavelengths of different orientations. And the effect that that has is glare and haze in the atmosphere, glare on wet rocks. And it can sometimes be quite distracting in your images. So a polarizer is really good to kind of cut through the glare. Think of it like cleaning up the light that's coming towards you. It blocks out some of the wavelengths and just lets through wavelengths of the same orientation. What it means is, instead of the glare off a wet rock, you'll get the patterns off the rocks and the detail. Instead of the glare off wet sand in the foreground, you'll get the texture and pattern that's able to increase the interest in your foreground. It also has an effect on water and clouds, giving it more contrast, making your clouds pop in the sky, and more contrast in moving water, again, particularly in the foreground and midground of your image. A polarizer is also helpful to give a little bit more vivid color, particularly in the green and blue channels. So a polarizer is particularly handy around waterfalls and forests, where the greens can really pop when you've got a polarizer on there. So a polarizer can be quite effective in a whole range of different situations. The effect that a polarizer has on your images can't be replicated in software in post-processing. So that's why I would recommend any photographer, it doesn't matter where you are on your photography journey, that you have at least one polarizer in your landscape kit. The only thing that you've got to be a little bit careful about is when the sky is really clear, particularly during midday, a polarizer can have this weird shadowing effect in the clear sky. I don't use a polarizer when I'm taking astro images. I'm also careful each time I put the polarizer on the front of the lens. I'm thinking carefully about the sort of effect that I want in the image. And if I've got a reflection off the surface of the water, the polarizer will remove that, and sometimes I want that to be part of the image. So I won't dial the polarizer in to have the maximum effect. I'll just adjust it slightly so that I can keep that reflection in the surface of the water or on wet sand, etc. Next up, we have neutral density filters. Neutral density filter is the same amount of density or darkness right across the entire filter. This here is a square filter. These also come in screw-on filters like this one here. This is a variable neutral density. So much like a polarizer, you can turn these rings and you can dial in the amount of neutral density that you want. They come in different densities. So this one here is the 10-stop neutral density, and this is the Lee filter 6-stop neutral density. The 6-stop stops 6 stops of light right across the entire image. So if you had a shutter speed of say 1/125th of a second, this will drop it to around about half a second, whereas the 10 stop would take that shutter speed of 1/25th and you'd probably have about an 8-second shutter speed. So the 10 stop is particularly good, say in the middle of the day, where you want to cut out a lot of light, whereas the 6 stop is probably better when there is slightly less light, maybe on a cloudy day or later on in the afternoon when the sun is a little bit lower. Not quite sunset, but just a few hours before that and there's less light. The 6 stop is quite handy to use there. Neutral densities are particularly handy when you want to extend your shutter speed from say a couple of seconds to a couple of minutes, and it allows you to create an effect with something that's moving in the scene, like clouds across the sky. You can blur them and capture their movement, water running down a river or a waterfall, or if you want to smooth out ripples on the surface of a body of water, then the neutral densities are really handy to do that, because you can create a longer shutter speed. Of course, there's a third option with these two filters, and that is I can not only just have the 6 stop or a 10 stop, but I can double them up on my filter mount and I can have 16 stops of light. That would take my shutter speed of 1/25th of a second right up to about 4 to 6 minutes, which is an extremely long exposure. I don't do that particularly often. In fact, I don't do a lot of landscape in the middle of the day, so I don't even use my 10 stop all that much. I definitely use my 6 stop neutral density more often than the 10 stop. Really, the only thing that you've got to be careful about is if you are using the square version of the neutral density filters, then you need to make sure that the filter is close to the end of the lens, not in one of the slots which is further away from the lens. That just ensures that you have less chance of light leaking in between the filter and the front of the lens and affecting the image. And in the same way, if you've got a DSLR like mine and you've got an exposure that is much longer than say 30 seconds, it's a good idea to close the eyepiece of the viewfinder. That means that, well, that'll prevent light from leaking in through the back of the camera and again affecting the image. If you do have light coming in at the back, the effect will be some banding across your image, and it's pretty much impossible to get rid of that. So it's a good idea to shut the eyepiece off. If you don't have a little shutter that closes the eyepiece off, then the next best thing is to grab a dark cloth and put it over the back of the camera when you're actually taking the shot to try and prevent as much light getting in the back as possible. When you want to control the light in just part of the image, say if the sky is really bright in comparison to the foreground, which has got some rocks and some shadowy areas, and if you were to bring up the exposure, it would blow out the highlights in the brighter part in the sky. What you need is a graduated filter like these ones here. This here is a 0.9 neutral density graduated filter, and if you just look at the neutral density part and where it transitions from dark to light, it does it quite quickly or quite abruptly and almost creates this hard line, hence the name. And where this works is where you put it on the front of your lens, you would match up the brightest part of your image, the sky, against the darker part of the filter, and the clearer part would be where the rocks and the shadows are. This then allows you to bring up the exposure and still control your highlights, still protect your highlights through the neutral density part, which is over the sky. These come in a couple of different forms. As I said, this is a hard graduated filter. I've also got a soft graduated filter here. And if you have a look at this, as the neutral density transitions from dark to light, it does it over a much larger area, and it's a lot softer. So that's a soft grad. I also have a couple of reverse grads as well, and if you have a look at the neutral density part, whereas typically it goes from dark to light as you go down the filter, this actually works the opposite way and goes, the dark part is in the bottom of the neutral density section, and as you go up the filter it gets brighter and brighter. So when do you use each of these types of lenses? Well, when I've got a really flat or even horizon, say for a seascape, which I shoot a fair amount of here in Australia, I'll use a hard grad because that hard line of the graduated part of the filter will match up quite nicely with my horizon. If I'm in a landscape where again the horizon is quite flat, then I'll use a hard grad. I'll use a soft grad if my scene is has got an uneven horizon. It might be a mountain or a mountain range, it might be tree tops that is forming part of my horizon, or a crop of rocks or something like that, but it's just creating an uneven horizon, then the soft grad is perfect for that. The reverse grad, as I said before, is perfect for sunsets when the sun or the brightest part of the sky is just above the horizon, and then as you move above the horizon it gets darker and darker. This matches the neutral density getting less and less the further it goes up the filter. Each of these come in different strengths. So for my soft grad I've got a 0.3, a 0.6 and a 0.9. In the hard grads I've got a 0.3, a 0.6 and a 0.9, and in the reverse grad my lightest or softest one is a 0.6, I've got a 0.9, and I've got this one here which is a 1.3. So are these a necessary part of your kit? Well, if you didn't have a graduated filter and you had a scene that had a dynamic range, or effectively some bright parts and some darker parts in your scene that was beyond the dynamic range of your camera, then the only alternative would be to bracket your shots. Take a shot that is exposed for the brightest part of that image, and then take a second shot that is exposed for the darker part of that image, and then you merge them together in Lightroom. Personally, I prefer to use filters. It just suits the way that I work out in the field. It allows me to get a better idea of what the image is going to look like in camera, and I can be safe that I have got all of the detail and not blown out my highlights when I'm using filters in conjunction with the histogram on the back of the camera. Keep in mind that having these filters going into the filter mount this way is only one way of using it, because typically your sky is the brightest part, so the neutral density matches that part of the image. But if you've got a scene where the foreground, the bottom part of your image, is the brightest part, then you can always turn these around and slide them into the filter holder upside down, and effectively just use the neutral density part where the brightest part of the image is to be able to control that part of the scene in terms of the light, and take your shot from there. Most of the filters that we've talked about come in both a screw-on style, where it just screws straight onto the front of your lens, and the square style, where it slots into a filter mount. Some photographers prefer the screw-on style. They're cheaper and they're a little bit simpler to use because you don't have to worry about a filter mount. They just screw straight on. You can also stack these as well, but you've got to be fairly careful with vignetting. With the square filters, there's a little bit more involved. So you have your camera with your lens, and the first thing you need is a adapter ring that then screws onto the front of your lens here. Then once the adapter ring is there, then all you need to do is grab your filter mount, and that just clips onto the front of your lens like that. The filter has a room for 2 filters with the 2 filter slots, but you can actually add more, but I've never really needed more than 2 slots. And then to add the filter, all you need to do is pick a slot and push that into the mount like that. And there you have it. If you want to use a polarizer with this setup, then you can. This is the polarizer mount that I can then just clip onto the front of the lens like that. This is the new filter adapter from Lee. This is called the Lee 100. It's only been out for a few months, maybe a month or 2, and it really is very, very easy to use. It's lighter than the previous version, but on the previous version, the polarizer mount was permanently screwed onto the front of the mount. But if I don't want the mount to be there, I can just clip it off, as simple as that, and then I can just use the mount without the polarizer. If I want the polarizer added on there again, it's quite simple to just click and away I go. The polarizer is on the outside, which makes it a lot easier to be able to tune in or dial in the amount of polarizing that I want, and then I still have access to the filters behind as well, and I can swap them out whenever I need to. One of the disadvantages of the screw-on filters is if you have lenses of different thread sizes, you need to buy different size filters for each of those filters, which means that you need to keep track of which filters you need to remember to bring for each lens. The advantage with the square filter system is I can use the filters on any lens I want, so long as I have an adapter ring that will adapt that size to the filter mount. So this particular lens has a filter thread of 62. I've got a step-up ring on the front here that goes from 62 to 77, which then matches the size of my adapter ring here. And then once that's on, my mount then just clips straight onto the front, and then I have full use of all the filters that I've purchased and the polarizers that I've purchased as well for this system. One of the advantages of the screw-on filters is even if you've got them mounted to your lens, you can still fit your lens cap to the front, which means that you can have your lens cap there right up to the point of when you want to take the shot. So it's really handy in situations where you've got water spraying around. It might be raining, or you might be near a waterfall and you've got some water being thrown back at you. You can have that cap protecting the front of the lens so you don't get any water droplets on there. You can also, if you've stacked these in one or 2 of them, water droplets can't get in between the filters either when you've got screw-on filters. Unlike the square mounts where there is a gap in between the polarizer and the filters behind it, where droplets of water can get into, and to clean that, it's a little bit more involved. It's not impossible. All you need to do is take your filter out and give it a wipe and then put it back in again. I get around that by putting a shower cap over the whole lot, the lens and the filters. I get my exposure and my composition set up, and then when I'm ready to take the shot, I take the shower cap off, get my focus, take the shot, and then put the shower cap back on again. One of the disadvantages of a screw-on filter is if you're going to use a graduated filter that is a screw-on, the line between the dark part of the filter and the light part of the filter, which this isn't by the way, but pretend that there's a line, it's usually in the middle of the filter, which means that your horizon line, or the line in your image between the light part and the dark part, needs to match up with the center of the filter, and that's not always the case, particularly if you've got the horizon on the top third or the bottom third of the image, which means you're going to have to line it up or recompose so that the line of the graduation lines up with the horizon, take your shot, and then crop it later on. Whereas with the square filters and the filter holder, All I need to do is slide my filter in. I've already composed my shot, and then I line up the hard graduated line in this particular case. I line that up with wherever that horizon line is, or wherever the line between the dark part of my image and the brighter part of my image. So it's a lot simpler that way to be able to adjust the filter to line up with the image that I want to take. There's no doubt that the square filter system certainly is a bigger investment up front, but you get a lot more flexibility and you get a lot more use out of the filters that you purchase within the system over time. It's a system that for me I find very, very convenient, very flexible. I know that it's always in my bag. It doesn't matter what lenses I have, I just got to make sure that I have the right adapter ring, and I've got full use of the filter system. I've left a link to all of the filters that I've discussed in the video in the description below if you want to check it out. Now, before I get on to what I recommend for filters, I just want to remind you that this video is sponsored by Squarespace. If you don't know who Squarespace are, they provide an online platform that makes it really quick and easy to create a website. I've been using Squarespace for over 4 years now, and I find it really easy to update the content and add new features to my website. I've just recently started up a newsletter mailing list. If you're interested, head over to my website and sign up for that. It was really easy to set up the mailing list through Squarespace. They have lots of really easy to use and simple features that allows me to customize the mailing list the way that I want it to work. Updating content on all the other pages is really simple. I just drag and drop content that I want to appear on the page, and Squarespace just sorts out the design for me and makes sure that it looks good on a desktop as well as an iPad and a mobile phone. You can start your free trial at squarespace.com, and if you do check them out and you want to go ahead with a website, make sure you go to squarespace.com/Andrew Marr to get 10% off your first purchase. I get asked plenty of times for my recommendations for filters, and it's a bit of a tricky question because it really depends on you, your style, the sorts of landscapes you like to shoot, and where you are on your landscape photography journey. But here's some general advice. If you haven't already, go out and pick yourself up a polarizer. If you're new to photography and new to landscape photography in particular, you don't even know whether landscape's your thing or you're on a budget, then pick up a screw-on polarizer. But make sure it's a circular polarizer so you can control how much polarization effect you have on the image. These are relatively cheap in comparison to a whole system. It's something that you'll probably use on more than 80% of your images. So it's a good purchase. If you're really getting into landscape photography and you are thinking about investing in a square filter system, then don't just think about the adapter, also think about the kinds of filters that you want to use and the quality of them. Because hopefully this filter system will be with you for many years. You should start out small. First, work out what sort of landscapes you're going to be shooting. If you're like me and shoot plenty of seascapes and the landscapes you shoot are relatively flat with a flat horizon, then you're going to want to pick up some hard grads. If you're lucky enough to be shooting mountainous areas with valleys, then maybe a soft grad system is going to be more suitable. Once you've done that, I suggest you pick up a 0.6 of either of those two types of filters. A 0.6 is right in the middle, and for me it probably covers 60-65% of the images that I take. After that, I'd suggest picking up a 0.3. The reason for that is if the 0.6 is too dark and you need to go lighter, then the 0.3 is probably suitable. But if you need to go darker than the 0.6, then you can stack these two together in the mount and you've got effectively a 0.9 graduated filter. So you're getting more flexibility out of two filters. Depending on where your photography takes you, you can add to your system gradually over time. It took me approximately 4 to 5 years to build out the Square filter system that I currently use. Thanks very much for sharing your images with me on Instagram. I really did enjoy looking through all of the seascapes. I'm going to share some of them with you at the end of this video. I know a lot of you use filters, so if you have captured some images using filters, post them up on Instagram, and in the caption include at Andrew_Marr, as well as the hashtag AMFilters, and I'll check them out. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like and share it with your friends. If you have any questions on filters, add them in the comments below and I'll get back to you. But until next time, guys, thanks very much for watching.